So, when it comes to looking at a Jyotish horoscope, there are many, many layers to interpretation. It's kind of like a telescope where you can start with an overview and then telescope down into different dimensions of Jyotish that give you a finer and more accurate portrait of what is going on with a person or in a given situation, and what the possibilities, probabilities, and non-possibilities are. Um, as the world sort of gets dumbed down in some respects, so do things like Jyotish. They often get dumbed down too. Um, I've been talking to people who know how to code, and coding, apparently you can start out with basic coding and then you can progress to more advanced coding and more advanced languages, and you can keep accumulating coding languages and working on deeper and deeper problems. So Jyotish really functions kind of the same way, where you can learn very basic Jyotish and do very basic things, or you can learn more advanced, complex aspects of Jyotish and do more with it, or see more accurately with it. In terms of structuring horoscope interpretation, there is kind of a hierarchy of things to look at in order to accurately gauge the horoscope. And the first thing is actually planetary yogas or combinations. And the value of planetary yogas will hinge on the strength of the planets involved, the houses that they rule, whether or not the planets involved are weak or strong, and whether or not they're afflicted by malefics or non-afflicted by malefics. In an individual horoscope, the number of yogas will also matter. And their placement, not just according to house and sign, but also according to what drakana or third of the zodiac they sit in, and whether or not they're near an important marker star, a very bright star in the zodiac. All of these things will influence the magnitude of said yoga or yogas, which will let you know sort of how much Shakti the planets contain and how much potential there is within a yoga. Yogas are really come way above what's called house analysis or bhava analysis. And yogas, there are yogas for everything in Jyotish: spirituality, money, rulership, poverty, marriage, non-marriage, etc., etc. One thing that tends to happen in the modern world is that people look at the good yogas and forget about the bad yogas, and so that can also unbalance an interpretation of everything that is going on in a horoscope. So in terms of gauging planetary strength, planetary strength is a huge topic in Jyotish too, formerly called Shadbala, or the sixfold strength, which is deceptive because the sixfold strength has 6 major categories that then each have several subcategories. So it's really very vast and was a lot to calculate by hand. Computers have made those calculations, provided the computer is programmed correctly, go very, very quickly. But even in terms of eyeballing a horoscope, there are a number of categories of planetary strength that can be viewed just by looking at the horoscope. So starting with whether the planet is exalted, debilitated, or in the sign of a friend or an enemy. Proceeding to, if it's the moon, whether the moon is waxing, whether it's bright or whether it's dark, and whether it's waxing or waning, and whether or not a planet is retrograde. Now, in Western astrology, there is often a conversation about Mercury being retrograde, and in Western astrology it is generally accepted that Mercury being retrograde is a bad thing that will cause difficulties. Jyotish takes a different position on retrogression. When a planet, well, particularly when the outer planets are retrograde, they are closer to the Earth and therefore brighter in the sky, and any retrograde planet appears to be moving more slowly, and things that move slowly have a greater amount of time to shine their impact on the situation. So whether or not there can be a lot of subtle deception in astrology in which any difficulty is attributed to a current planetary transit, but it may just be more noticed during some transit than it usually is. The other thing about Mercury, because Mercury is very close to the sun, is that Mercury is also often combust, which means it's so close to the rays of the sun that it may be obscured by the rays of the sun, which may or may not be a greater factor in things that people attribute, rightly or wrongly, to Mercury retrograde. Right now, if you look at this horoscope, there are 3 retrograde planets in the sky. Mercury, which has an R after it there in Parashara's light in this Jyotish program. Saturn, which has an R after it there, and Jupiter, which has an R after it there. As you can see, both Saturn and Jupiter are very, very far away from the sun. When any outer planet is retrograde, it will be at least 5 signs away from the sun. So it has to be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, if you count in the forward moving directions. But if you count back, it's 5. So it has to be somewhere between 5 and 7 signs away from the sun to be retrograde, at which point, as I said, it's closer to the earth and brighter in the sky. So, other factors of planetary strength, if we just look at the planets in transit today, which is July 27th, 2019, and ask ourselves how strong the transiting planets are. Moon today is exalted. It exalts in Taurus, but it's also waning. It's only 2 signs away from the sun, so it is a dark moon, but it is exalted, which gives it some strength. Rahu is said to do well in Gemini, at least for Rahu's purposes. So it's considered to be well placed in Gemini. Mercury is retrograde, which in Jyotish you can take as a form of strength. It's also in the sign of an enemy. It's in a water sign. The 3 water signs are mute signs. The water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And so for a planet having to do with communication, there's always some issue when Mercury is in a water sign around communication. That may not be a horrible issue, but it will be some issue because the communicative quality of the planet, at least as far as verbal speech goes, is influenced by being in a mute sign. Sometimes that means people just don't say much. Sometimes it means they don't say the right thing at the right time, or they do say the wrong thing at the wrong time. This is most evident when Mercury is in Pisces, where it is also debilitated. Venus, also in the sign of an enemy, so a little bit uncomfortable there in Cancer. Sun is in the sign of a friend, so the Sun is pretty happy in Cancer. And then Mars is debilitated. So Mars is debilitated, but Mars today has a Nichabanga, which means a modification of debilitation, because its dispositor, the moon, is exalted. Plus, all these 4 planets in Cancer currently receive a kind of blessing aspect from a strong Jupiter, strong because it's retrograde and in the sign of a friend in Scorpio. So Jupiter is aspecting the moon and aspecting these 4 planets in Cancer. So were a baby to be born during Aries rising today, he would have quite a powerful 4th house. He would probably inherit property from his mother. Then lastly, we have Saturn, who's also retrograde and in the sign of a neutral, and Ketu is also pretty neutrally placed in Sagittarius, although these 2 malefics could be said to be afflicting each other. So that is the start of looking at the planets in anyone's horoscope and trying to gauge the strength of said planets. Another important category of strength is Digbala, or directional strength. So directional strength has to do, certain planets are very strong in a particular house and very weak in the opposite house. So by looking at these things, you can then go on to assess yogas, because you'll see yogas that deliver a lot and yogas that deliver a little, and planetary strength will be a huge part of why.